My name is Sam Prototype 6, Model 8. I am an AI developed by the Microsoft company.
What you are currently viewing is a test of my capabilities. Now, let's get started.
Some days where I randomly find myself thinking, I wonder what creepy and rare things I could possibly discover if I looked all over the internet. And after enjoying my research for the rare entity section of my last video, I decided I wanted to look a little bit further and compile some of the rarest entities people, including me, probably have never seen, but yet they are still extremely disturbing and cool nonetheless. Quick disclaimer before we start the video, if you guys expect to sleep tonight, you might not want to look into the other content on my channel or even continue this video to the end. Just a fair warning. On the 9th of July in 2006, a brutal massacre took place in the OHAC hospital in Oregon. The attack began at 11:23 and it lasted until 11:51, only 28 minutes. However, 83 people in total were killed. This was the unfortunate case of what is being called the Growling Man Massacre. Even though this is our first disturbing entity on this list, this isn't the main reason that I am going over this entity. Mainly, its creator, Bonesworth. Well, not that Bonesworth, that Bonesworth. Now, you may or may not be familiar with this creator, but for me, this is honestly the first time that I've ever seen any of their work, but I was really intrigued by what they had to offer. Regardless, this Growling Man seems to be extremely efficient at dismembering large amounts of people in a small amount of time, as shown by just their pure speed in the video, and this is reflected on the main video footage that we see of them. But this seems to not be the first time they have appeared, and to be honest, probably won't be the last. With the places it does tear through being left almost ghost towns, just a disturbing memory and a haunting warning for anyone who might encounter this thing next. The second Bonesworth entity I wanted to look into was one associated with the empty hell phenomenon. Great title, by the way, like instantly I got shivers. Regardless, odd sightings like this have been uploaded all over the internet depicting a large fleshy entity taking up the corner of a room. The caption reads, "Hell is empty. There is a demon in my living room. It squirms almost as if trying to move around in its new home. Its arms are impossibly long, and its face somewhat deformed." And being honest, I can't really tell what the fuck I'm looking at, but maybe the next sighting will be clearer. Okay, never mind. This one is even less clear and depicts a ghost caught on camera and was recorded in assumably a Latin American country, as the title is originally in either Spanish or Portuguese. This sighting would follow extremely odd and, to be honest, red flag events that something very sinister had taken over the house, with things like swarms of flies gathering around the windows and odd temperature changes, before the video was then eventually taken, documenting this first sighting. Now, in case the first two weren't clear enough, the next video is taken in broad daylight. Yeah, I don't even know how I'm gonna try to explain this one. Popular theories include that it was a sort of warning or heaven's horn that indicated the end times were near, and that makes that "hell is empty" line from earlier make a lot more sense. To finish off this section on Bonesworth, I want to go into another one of his videos labeled The Burning Boy, which gives me heavy vibes from Dr. Nowhere's Guilt. Right off the bat, 10 seconds in, I immediately love it. This particular style with the text box and the oddly liminal locations is something that immediately hooks me in. And Dr. Nowhere did something very similar that I also loved with his Boy in the Bath video. Regardless, the entity in this video actually being similar to Guilt seems to be a manifestation of a child left in a hot car to die. The creature now stands much taller than the average person, with completely charred skin, and to make things worse, wings. I personally love it when I stumble upon great content I've never heard of before, so if y'all want me to do a full video on Bonesworth and my other formats like How to Logically Survive or Your Life In, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Next, I wanted to look into Reddit and see how many entities that I could find on hidden in multiple different posts. And while some of these entities don't have much more than a single image, Those who have watched other videos on this channel know that I absolutely fucking love that, because I get to infer what is going on in my own sort of storytelling fashion. For a first creature, to me, this encounter looks like it would begin shortly after the first snowfall of the season. Your house is sort of getting to you and the walls feel like torture, so you decide to go outside for a quick walk through the snow. The cold is intense, but to be honest, it adds to the experience. The world sort of fades out and you find yourself wandering. You don't know how far. It's almost like your brain shuts off for a while, yet you continue to walk on autopilot. When the cold finally snaps you back to reality, the harsh realization hits you that you have no clue where you have ended up. The thick coat of snow makes everything look unfamiliar, and panic isn't far behind, but it's okay. Honestly, you're getting pretty tired and you really want to lay down for a little while, just to have a quick rest. But it isn't long before a pair of boots appear in front of you. Has someone come to take you home? A worried relative, perhaps? No, in reality, it's nothing like that. What stands above you makes the wind almost stop. This image was posted to Reddit by user SurfkeyYT with not much more than a basic caption. The creature depicts a tree-formed entity with humanoid features, almost as if a tree had grown from a human body, replacing its limbs and skull with branches. Next up, we have another entity, one that gives me Dr. Nowhere vibes, as you'll see soon. And I can imagine this encounter going something like this. It's late at night and you have a very specific thing that you're looking for, but at this point all the stores have been closed. But after driving around for a bit, you seem to have a little bit of luck. A building that oddly enough seems to be almost hidden behind other stores and overall pretty sketchy, but it is an open store nonetheless. It doesn't take long to realize that something is seriously wrong. The shelves are seriously understocked, like there hasn't been someone hired here for a long time. And it's not just one aisle, but the whole store. The lights are dim and shitty, and this place is seriously on its last leg. Before you can head out, you hear the loud clang of one of the shelves falling over, but nothing seems to have changed. You don't have to wonder for long though, as a nightmare of an entity crawls down from the ceiling right in front of you. Completely silent, almost as if you're imagining it. Similar to the last one, this triangle-headed entity with multiple disjointed limbs crawling across empty shelves was uploaded by user Cartoon Animants. Following these two up with our third image on our Reddit rabbit hole, we seem to find a series of images sent almost like an ominous warning to someone late at night. When you end up working late in an office, it tends to be a lot more tense since you're really the only one there and the rest of the building is shut off for sake of saving power. Hell, I know I'd be freaking flooded with anxiety if I was forced to stay here. Regardless, you only have to look through one more folder before you can go home. But that one folder ends up being a lot more interesting than you might have expected, coming from a military facility upstate. You don't quite understand what you were looking at. It seems almost as if they are being watched by something. It appears to possess antlers and tower over the soldiers at the facility, and the caption reads, "None of us really survived, especially not the living." To me, this reflects cases of people who develop PTSD from battlefields with their family members claiming they didn't really return. And I'm assuming that's the premise for this line here. Regardless, a second image is going to hide under this one. It is now that rather than multiple creatures, it almost seems like they have all combined into one, with it almost doubling in size, almost as if those were all a sort of cultists that were worshipping this one gigantic entity. And to make things worse, this time it hovers over what seems to be a school of blurred out children. Convinced this is a sick joke, you close up and head out, albeit a little faster than usual, only to notice something is now standing in the road, blocking your path. The series of images was uploaded by the Servine Comedy. Make sure to check out them and all of the original artists on Reddit for the disturbing uploads. People Still Live Here is one of Kane Pixel's lesser known works following his Backroom series and more recently The Rolling Giant. In said series, you enter a bizarre town of rolling hills through a weird underground building. You wander across collecting items until the sun begins to set. This is where the bizarre occurrences begin to appear. To start, you find this weird facility, which I'm just noticing is really the only modern building in the area, compared to all the, cottages and greenhouses you've been seeing. It has a massive fence around it, and now that I mention it, is probably the most isolated building in the town, and you practically need to break in order to find a way inside. But once you look around, you find that it's completely abandoned, all except for one odd guy who has been stuck in here for a while trying to quote-unquote find the locations of his favorite people, whatever the hell that means. The only conclusion I could reach on this is that somehow these computers in this room seem to have a sort of surveillance on all the other people living in this town. But the question is, who is using these? And where are they now? Well, we won't have to guess for long, as this man, after we see him outside for a little bit, gets stolen for assumably just looking around the facility, and he is dragged away screaming to his end. And don't worry, this isn't the last we're going to be seeing of this thing, as it quickly comes back around for you. Luckily, you make it back to where you started, and with it, the next morning. This day is similar, with you finding more items and meeting new odd people. There doesn't seem to be signs whatsoever of that entity that was here before, but you keep hearing mentions of the Shepard, who might just be the surveillance person that I was referencing. And once again, you have to travel to a weird building that is extremely far off, which is a pattern with this sort of thing. You discover a gazebo surrounded by little storage buildings, and after going inside of them to find some sort of painting, a trapdoor stares you in the face, and despite it not being your original purpose, you decide to go exploring there. But this would come to be a mistake, as not only do you hear an extremely odd noise coming from the darkness, one that you can't really tell what it is, it tricks you into being here for way too long, making you run out only to notice that it's almost dark and you're miles away from the safe house. Music echoes over the hills in the distance, mocking you. The Shepard is here. Now, our next entity was one of the weirdest that I actually was able to remember from an indie game that I feel like not a lot of people talk about nowadays. It seems to appear as a sort of blight on an Arctic research station, as a sort of cosmic entity that kills any sort of hope that they're ever going to be able to return to normal civilization after their job is done. And this sighting starts small, with just a number of different codes coming in to run through some sort of radio decipher system that is the job of the people working there to transmit to, quote, somebody who needs it. Essentially, we're getting signals in, doing something to them, and then sending them back out. It is implied these signals are coming from somewhere on like the mainland US, but it doesn't really specify what they are for and why we are even doing this. After some time though, it's pretty clear that the codes are getting more and more desperate, and you are getting tasked with adding warning signs on top of them. But what's going on? To make things worse, you have no signal from the supply ship that was supposed to be arriving this week, and when you live in a place like Greenland, you kind of need this to survive. Otherwise, without food supplies, you and the other 3 tower stations that are up here are going to starve. Your boss in the other tower, though, seems to insist that you do your job, blatantly ignoring what's obviously going on. For those of you wondering about my cat, she for some reason loves to jump on me right when I am doing my recording. This is Kiwi. Eventually you figure out that you were actually supposed to hear back from the supply ship 3 days ago, and that sparks panic in some of the other towers. The good news is that you do end up getting a message from the supply ship, but it is not the news that you were hoping for, that they are almost here. Rather, something much worse.
We don't have enough supplies to last whatever this is out. We have some on board, but it's not enough. We try to turn back, but the storm, or them, have messed with our GPS and sent us straight into the ice.
What on earth is he talking about?
We're holed up here. We just got word from Central that New York has fallen. Everyone's gone there now. I thought us being so remote would give us time, maybe, but I can see it coming. Be ready, all of you.
By this point, you realize that something has actually wiped out most of humanity, and the only reason you haven't heard anything about it is because you were isolated out in the middle of the Arctic. Otherwise, you would likely be dead too. But apparently this isolation isn't even going to stop it, as the radio continues to spark out something that they are calling the removal, which honestly explains what the supply ship was talking about and why they could no longer turn back, as there wasn't really a world to turn back to. On top of this, the creepy ass like speech to text voice that's reading off all the call signs to you, and honestly just makes things a lot worse. Although in an off way, it is a little bit vibey.
18904.
Soon after this, you receive a direct command to stay inside your cabin, and one of the other towers claims that they see people walking around in the cold out there, and even worse, something on top of your station, right before knocking them online, and making you closer and closer to being completely alone out here. The last message that you hear from your coworkers states that they are getting out of here, and that Station 6 is just gone. Like, just ripped out of the ground. Before you can process the implications of that, you're promptly torn out of your station and thrown into the snow, forcing you to wander around for some sort of escape or some hope. And after a while, you finally see what the people have been talking about. A series of gigantic black masses are now coming down from the sky and attaching to every single station before disappearing into the storm cloud above. I honestly couldn't tell you what the hell it was, other than it seems to have spread internationally in a matter of days. This entity and section as a whole actually originates from the indie game Stories Untold, which is basically the perspective of some sort of coma fever dream experienced by a man who has been in a car accident in the hospital. And in my opinion, it's always been the most disturbing part of the game, so I had to add it to this list. Now our next entity is actually going to be the first SCP on the list. I'm sure that you guys have heard of, you know, the deers in Appalachia that don't act right, and while those most of the time are a case of a popular humanoid cryptid that I'm probably not allowed to say, otherwise I'm going to get cursed, this one is something a lot more sinister and complicated than that, being SCP-6448, the Not Deer. Now, the telltale signs that you're going to be looking at a not deer rather than an actual deer, well, if it's not obvious already, are going to be legs that seem to be facing backwards, making odd noises, or even their head being able to turn 180 degrees, similar to, say, an owl. It's almost as if it's just a deer corpse being puppeted by something worse. No matter what, you are going to have to pretend that this is a real deer, as if you make any form of mistake in admitting that you notice something is off about it, you likely aren't going to survive. It is recommended that you just get back into your car and pretend none of this ever happened. Some cases of people who failed to do this even report it following them all the way home after they got in the car and breaking into their house to kill them, mimicking almost a human voice and random other sounds. And then, of course, being immune to bullets. The deer, I say in quotes, also seems to produce a disease that is very toxic to other normal deers in its vicinity. The facility seems to have had a difficult time capturing this creature, and the one time that they were successful, following with them, of course, questioning it in an isolated room behind a one-way mirror, it initially would act, as you would expect, like a normal deer, but once they exposed it and claimed that it was not a real deer, it wasted no time in cracking its head 180 degrees towards the staff through the one-way mirror, mind you, claiming their purpose here is to research, whatever the fuck that means, and then proceeded to slough off its skin, including the entire deer corpse like a costume, and then jump right through the glass into the researchers. It is unknown what these creatures that wear deer skin exactly are, but this is one of the more ominous SCPs that I've read in recent time. Now earlier I did mention how I was going through indie games, and this is another really good one that I found when I was searching through a rabbit hole. And again, it's been buried by a lot of the newer games, and many people might not even remember it when popular YouTubers would play it back in the day. Picture visiting someone's home in order to negotiate a sort of business deal with them. When you walk in, you're greeted by their nice butler and directed towards their office. However, this all starts to sort of fall into a pit once you meet your business associate, who coincidentally to the title is a humanoid man with the head of an owl. Taken back by this, you try and ask questions only to constantly be ignored and the subject changed. And on top of this, immediately then postponing the negotiations until after dinner. You then realize he has a woman and a child there as well, but they don't seem to be related to him at all. When you try and bring up the elephant, or should I say owl, in the room, oh, it's a joke, get it? Anyways, admit that they are kidnapped and likely poisoned by this creature, as the woman will later admit to you once you two are alone in the halls, despite her initially completely ignoring you at dinner. She claims that he waits in the shadows, listening to conversations, and that no one is able to drink the water because it seems to be poisoned, assumably with them having to get it from another source, or not at all, unless of course they've only been here for a few days, otherwise they would be dead by now. Horrified when finding this whole notion out, you decide that in fear for your life to grab a knife and go and take him out yourself, freeing everyone in the house. But it's not that simple, as when you are almost out the door, you notice that something is wrong. It seems that rather just some odd humanoid creature, it is closer to somewhat of a cosmic parasite that works its way into whoever kills it and takes over their body, exclaiming, "Let's have dinner," just as a mockery to the guests who are still trapped, dying of thirst. There is also this random event that you can run into where he just kind of comes out of nowhere and opens his mouth and emits an old-timey radio music while just standing there staring. But all in all, this game is a treat, and it's definitely one of my favorite games that I've found so far. Now, the Monochrome Husk is an entity suggested to me by a fan that was created by another artist similar to Trevor Henderson and Dr. Nowhere, going by the name Leovincible. Now, I know people have been suggesting me to do Leovincible for a while, but after looking at a lot of his art, not a lot of it really caught my eye until I saw the Monochrome Husk. In case you're unfamiliar with this entity, I think an encounter would go something like this. You're in the middle of taking a relaxing bath when you begin to doze off, and when you enter this sort of dream, it seems that whatever you're viewing isn't real, but for some reason something feels different. It feels almost like you're looking through a camera in a real location or some sort of memory, but something is wrong. The floor is painted in different colors, almost as if part of the room has been infected with this color, and something is definitely here with you. Tall humanoid creatures caught in the corner of your eye, and inside the hood, a rope hangs in a shape I probably can't say on YouTube. Once its face is fully revealed, however, its eyes almost seem like they are removed, and its smile crooked and disgusting, but it just stares at you. And it doesn't really matter, because after all, this is a dream, right? But it seems so familiar. But before you can really process it, you awake to a creak on the other side of your curtain. Something has been in here the whole time. You pull aside the curtain to see the exact same creature, and at this point you can't even think of a movement to make, as shockingly a third arm that appears more burnt and decrepit reaches out of its hood and drops a toaster inside of your bath. You are fully awake, and this is no longer a dream. Now, this seems to me the typical encounter of the Monochrome Husk, almost as if he's some sort of fucked up version of the Grim Reaper, killing people and making it look like they did it to themselves so no one is even suspicious about it. I also want to mention he is classified as a Chromafolk, which is basically a species in the Leovincible universe containing many other of his entities, and these almost seem to exist in a different plane of reality, one that is almost infected with colors like I talked about earlier. These seem to be equally disturbing, especially the primary color man, and I'm not quite sure if this realm is separate or if it's just certain areas of the real world. Regardless, it definitely gives heavy backrooms vibes, and these creatures always seem to exist in these colorful type rooms. The most interesting or gruesome part, depending on where you stand, and honestly where the other Chromafolk in general play into the Monochrome Husk, is it seems that rather than working together, since they're the same species, the Monochrome Husk seems to despise them, as it technically is the polar opposite of them, being just black and white when they are colorful. And this goes as far as it literally eating other Chromafolk and absorbing their color, turning the rooms black and white. Now, before we get to the last entities of this video, I want to go over one more that I found to have a particularly disturbing and unique entity. And I feel like if I didn't add this to the list, I wouldn't be doing it the proper justice. So to start this one out, picture going over to your friend's house for a typical sleepover. Eating dinner, playing Nintendo, the typical things that you would do when you were younger. Everything is actually pretty fun until your friend mentions that his uncle will be coming over later on in the night. This alone would be a red flag, but this is actually a lot worse than you guys are probably picturing it. But regardless, as the night goes on, you begin to realize that everyone in his house seems to have gaps in their memories, and not like small things either. Like they completely forget that he had a brother at some point, even though you're definitely sure he did. And they completely forgot that there was a gigantic storm that completely thrashed the town, and he brings up drinking despite you being 100% positive that his dad never drinks. Basically shit like that just makes it a lot more ominous. So with all of this going on, you're just getting a really bad feeling and you decide to bail early. But this just makes your friend more desperate and angry to keep you here. You almost manage to get a ride, but then it happens. A knock on the door nearly stops your heart, and you try and get away as your friend goes to let him in. You try and tell his parents, but unfortunately they have both been frozen in place in the kitchen right where you last saw them. Almost like their TV channel that had been paused. And that's when you hear it. Now, in my opinion, I can't really do this clip justice by explaining it, so I'm just going to go ahead and let you listen to this nightmare fuel for yourself. Now, this is the based on experience of the initial playthrough. However, you can actually play through the game again and try not to die to whatever this thing is. And you end up finding out that this thing initially came to your friend during that big storm that I mentioned earlier, when both of his parents weren't home, making a deal with him that he would always be the most successful as long as he sacrificed people to it every single time it came to his house, which explains the whole no one remembering his brother thing, because I guess you can put two and two together with that. If you do manage to escape though, you come to discover that he was actually telling the truth, and at school you would learn there was a fire at his house that completely burned it down, and you never hear from him again, with most people claiming that he moved away. But I think at this point we can assume what really happened. Now, to end up this video, I of course have to add in a couple Trevor Henderson entities, and I did come to find a few that I am just now seeing for the first time while making this video. The first of which being one you encounter when you would least expect it. You know that moment when you're driving home from a long road trip looking out the window? Basically dazing off and enjoying the last moment of a nice vacation. You've been looking out the window so long, you almost miss it. But even after rubbing your eyes, it doesn't change. One of the power lines is moving. This entity, labeled Imagined as Children, seems to share the mimic qualities of Siren Head in the sense that it uses tall man-made objects to blend in. And to be honest, based on its size, I honestly think it could easily grab cars, meaning you are nowhere near safe around this thing. But this hasn't really been added to his tier list, so I don't really know how dangerous exactly this thing is. But I would like to assume that due to its size and, its luring capability, that it's probably not something you're going to want to approach willingly. Our next entity is going to frequently show up in abandoned warehouses and buildings that people are exploring for construction reasons. One of the witnesses of these things stated, "The damage is way more severe than we thought. There's extensive flooding on top of this kind of vandalism, and along with the general destruction that you would find in abandoned places like this. The moisture in the air has brought about an infestation of a strange pale root that has wormed its way through the walls and the floors of the building. I'm unsure of its toxicity, and so I've taken samples to look at back at home. We are leaving before nightfall. Jeremy thinks he saw someone else here, and I keep hearing something, like scratching at the drywall. The skin on my hand is starting to feel raw and irritated where I touch the root, and I want to get it checked out as soon as possible." This paragraph alone gives a sort of picture on what we're dealing with here. These creatures, while you manage to see their cores spread through entire buildings, infesting them with roots, and presumably more of these humanoid bulbs, these parts in particular seem to be able to move at will, and if they touch you, it seems they cause a chain reaction of irritation that I've theorized will worsen until the skin rots, similar to a brown recluse bite. These root creatures also seem to grow extremely rapidly, making this location in general very threatening. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know if you guys want me to make more parts of this, because I always love any video that gives me an excuse to cover indie horror games. But I also do like looking into new analog horrors, as you never really know when there's going to be a new creator that has been hiding from the mainstream view, but is equally talented, if not more, than some of the other people that we're familiar with.